There are some words that I really love to hear. And if somebody says to me, shall we have a day out next week? Shall we go away somewhere? What about next Wednesday? Shall we do something different then? My immediate response is, oh yes, please. Those for me are very good words. I wonder what the idea of having an away day is for you. I wonder what it makes you think about. Well, when I hear that word, and sometimes Gordon will say this to me, shall we go away for the day somewhere? Immediately I start planning. What clothes are we going to need? What shoes should we take with us? Are we walking anywhere? What about food? And, there's some treats I could bake. That would be nice to take with us. And what shall I freeze ready for it? And have we got enough petrol in the car? And I start to think of all sorts of planning, and I can almost feel the joy of those words now. Shall we have an away day? I wonder what it's like for you. So, thinking of an away day, when you think of all the things that you put in your backpack that you're going to take with you, or whatever you're carrying with you, do you stuff all sorts of other things into it as well? Do you take your bank statements with you? Do you take the brochure for the new greenhouse? Do you take your business papers with you? Do you take the brochures perhaps for another holiday? No, you leave all that behind and you go with just the basic things and you have a very good time. That's what an away day is like. You don't carry all the planning and all the thinking of all the ordinary weekdays with you. Now, maybe you have learned about the seventh-day Sabbath. Maybe you've thought about keeping it. Maybe you've even tried keeping it at some time and given up because it was too difficult. As somebody said to me recently, you can't read the Bible 24 hours a day. It's just not possible. And if it's holy time, how can you keep 24 hours holy? In this world we live in, it just wouldn't work. It's just not possible. So the question is, what do you do if you keep the Sabbath? What does it mean to observe the Sabbath? What does it mean to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? These are all the things that go through people's minds when they first hear of a seventh-day Sabbath. And normally they're thinking of all the things you shouldn't do, all the things you can't do, and they become very negative about it. But yet, when my husband Gordon says to me, what about a day out? I'm not thinking negatively. I'm not thinking to myself, I can't do any cooking. I can't do any gardening that day. I'm quite happy to leave it all behind and have an away day. And if you think of God's holy Sabbath day as an away day, but an away day with God, then you're pretty much on the right lines. But it needs just as much planning as an ordinary away day does. In Hebrew, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I have this on the words of other people that have told me, they talk about the different days of the week in a different way from us. So Sunday, the first day of the week, they talk about as 1 into the Sabbath, 2 into the Sabbath, 3 into the Sabbath, 4 and 5 into the Sabbath. And then when we come to the 6th day, that's called a different name. The Bible refers to it as the preparation day. And then we come to the Sabbath itself. So in fact, all during the week, the early people who kept the Sabbath were thinking about it as being the Sabbath coming at the end of a week of thinking about the Sabbath. And interestingly enough, even in Syriac, they had the same way of counting. So each day was in some way linked to the Sabbath. So it's a little bit like if you go on an away day next Wednesday, for instance, you might have Sunday for the shopping, you might have Tuesday for the packing up, Wednesday morning early, or even Tuesday night, putting the car ready, and then Wednesday, setting off. So really, they were thinking in days gone by of preparation for the Sabbath all during the week. But now we've said it's 24 hours. What about those 24 hours? Which 24 hours? Now that's a valid question, because normally in our world we keep each day from midnight to midnight. That's the legal thinking. That's when the day changes over to the next day. But that's Roman counting. That's man-made counting. So what we need to look at is the Bible counting. And now we're not looking at Jewish counting. Remember this all the way through what I'm saying. We're not talking here about the Jewish Sabbath. Jews keep their Sabbath from 6 o'clock till 6 o'clock. But we are talking about God's time, an away day with God. So we're on his wavelength, not on a cultural wavelength. When the world was first made, the world was dark. The world was without form and void. And God said, "Let there be light." And God called the dark part of the day night, and the daylight hours he called day. So it's all about sunset to sunset. And that is the way we think of our Sabbath, the Christian Sabbath. And even in Jesus' time, they went out, they brought their sick to be healed, it says, at even when the sun was set. And that's our clue. So when the sun sets on a Friday night, that is actually the beginning of God's Sabbath day. It's not just Saturday hours, it's Friday night hours from sunset right through to sunset on Saturday night. That is the 24 hours of God's reckoning. So those are the hours that we must think about and plan for and see how we can make it a good away day. But how do you know when the sun sets? Well, that's not a problem. Most newspapers have it somewhere in the corner, the local newspapers. If you don't find it there, you'll find it on the internet quite easily, usually on the BBC Weather Channel. That's easy to find it there, and they tell you what time the sun sets. So the first thing you need to find out is, when does the sun set on the day that you plan to experiment with keeping your first Sabbath? And then prepare for that time. Because really, God has said to you, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So it's God saying to you, come to me, we'll have an away day together. But this is the time when our appointment for that away day is to begin. So I want to see you, say for instance, 8 o'clock. I would like to see you at 8 o'clock, ready to come to me for the beginning of our away day. And then the away day would go from 8 o'clock, when the sun set, right through to 8 o'clock the next day, the end of Saturday, when the sun sets, and then you're into the first day of the week. So that's the way to look at it. Now then, I suggest that just like we said, the first into the Sabbath, one into the Sabbath, begin planning for your away day with God straight away on Sunday. And from experience, because I've kept the Sabbath all my life, I suggest that you start by thinking about what clothes you're going to wear. You might not think that's so important, but the whole idea of keeping the Sabbath is that it's a day that's peaceful, tranquil, no jostle, no fuss. And the chance is that if you leave your clothes to the last moment, you'll suddenly think, I never pressed those trousers, I should have done. So the idea is that you put all your clothes ready. If there's something needs laundering, launder it, press it, iron it, put it on a hanger, put it under a plastic cover if needed, and put your outfit away, just like you would if you were going to pack up for a holiday. because this is an away day with God. And also I suggest that God is a very important person in your life. So you don't want to meet God in your working clothes. This is a special day with God. So I suggest that you put on your more formal clothes to meet God, and then keep that outfit specially just for Sabbaths, and don't use it at other times. So keep the formal clothes then for worshipping God. But if at some point during the day you want to go out for a walk, then you can have casual clothes, and those will probably be ready anyway, somewhere to hand. But for meeting God and worshipping God and praising God formally, then keep a more formal outfit of clothes ready. So now, what about the kind of clothes that you'll wear? Have you polished your shoes? I had a friend of mine that always had a new pair of tights for Sabbath, because she said, I want to be clean, I want to be new for Sabbath, with a new heart, everything forgiven, everything put right, and I don't want to put on a pair of tights that might have a snag in them from the previous week. So she always, when she filled up the car with petrol, bought a new pair of tights and kept those for Sabbath, and then wore them during the week. It's only a suggestion. Nobody's saying you must do any of these things, but they just help you keep a definite frame of mind about the Sabbath, so that you feel that you've done all you can to get ready for the Sabbath. Now, the other thing that you've got to remember in preparing for the Sabbath, it's not just about the practicalities, although that's a good beginning. But the best beginning of all is to remember that it is a spiritual day. Now, many people in the world have really forgotten what a spiritual day is. What does it mean? What is a spiritual day? Does it mean that you have to pray all day? Take yourself away into a monastery and hide away for the day? By no means. Let me see if I can explain what the spiritual part of our lives is. We know what the physical side is. That's the walking, the moving, the eating, the sleeping, all those things. Then when you think about the intellectual side of your life, you know what that is. You watch the news, you're assessing what you're listening to, you're having a conversation with somebody, you're already assessing what they're saying and thinking and pigeonholing it. That is all intellectual. It doesn't mean brainy, but it means you're using your mind to do things. Even remembering your shopping list is an intellectual exercise. But then we have a spiritual side to us, and it really isn't talked about today. But the spiritual side of us is thinking about things like beauty. Now, that's an abstract. It's hard to define beauty. But when you look at the flowers, I've got in front of me now where I'm looking, a little bowl of pansies, and they're so beautiful. And that is a beauty that we cannot, it's not intellectual, we don't appreciate it by reading a book about it, and it's not physical. Yes, I can stroke the petals, but the spiritual side of it is really appreciating it. The colours of the petals, those little tiny fluffy yellow bits right in the middle of a pansy, these are all the spiritual side. When you look at a beautiful sunset, when you appreciate the sunshine on your face, these are all spiritual things because they appeal to the inner man. When you have a good relationship with somebody and you love somebody, or you have loved somebody, the experience of loving is a spiritual thing. But none of that comes without God, because it's God that loved us first, that's put that within us. It's God that created the beauty around us. It's God that created the design that we see around us and that we take note of and appreciate and like. And so when we're talking about a spiritual day with God, these are the kind of things that we're talking about. Things to do with God's creation. things to do with God himself, the things that he's shown us in his word. That's why we have worship on an away day with God. When we talk about worshipping somebody, we just use the expression these days, and more often than not just means singing. But I want you to think about that word worship. Worship comes from a word worth. And we're talking about worshipping God because he is worth something. Is God worth worshipping? Has God given you life? Has God given you understanding? Has God given you his Bible? Did Jesus come and die for us? Is God worthy of our love? He loved us, which is why we love him. So if he is worthy, he is a God to be worshipped. And this is something very special about our away day. This is what makes this away day different from an away day to the seaside on a Wednesday, with its ice creams and its donkey rides on the beach. You understand what I mean. This is a day when we can shut ourselves in with God and really love him, appreciate him, talk to him, thank him, give glory to him. And did you know that if we thank him for what he's given us, that gives him more pleasure than anything else you can imagine? He's done so much for us. And not very many people thank God. In fact, it says in Psalm 14 that the Lord looked down from heaven and he saw that no one was looking his direction. Everybody was going about their own business. And God is looking for just someone that will look to him, someone who will say thank you to him. That's what gives him the pleasure and the glory. So when verses in the Bible say, give God glory, praise God, this is what it's talking about. And the other thing we can learn in our spiritual away day is to look at these objects of nature. We see the sun come up, we see the sun reach its zenith, we see it set again. And it does the same day after day after day. Everything in God's world acts under laws. I saw today when I was out looking, I saw swifts, and the swifts, the birds, have come back from Africa. They've come back home to breed. They breed under the eaves in our village, and that is so wonderful. When I saw them, my heart lifted. But they work according to God's laws. They come back when God sends for them. God puts that little impulse in their brains, and they set their flight path for Britain, all the way from Africa. They know why they're here. It's only the human race that doesn't respond to the things of God. And yet God has given us laws. He's given us guidelines for living. And we think, I can do it. I'm a self-made person. This is why we are so confused these days. This is why we lose out on so much of the blessings in life. So when we're talking about a preparation, and this is what we're talking about at this stage in this talk, we're talking about this preparation for a spiritual day. So it's a good idea on all those days of the week to get to know God and talk to him. Talk to him in advance. Talk to him and ask him for advice. What would you like me to do? Ask him where your life needs to change. Ask him to become your friend. This is what makes it real when you finally come to the Sabbath to keep your away day with God. And then let's come back to the practicalities again. So when we think of going on an away day with God, let's think about the food. Now, when you have an away day with God, you can't take your microwave with you, but you can take food that's already prepared. And so I want to suggest that in preparation for the Sabbath, that we put all our food ready early on in the week, pop it in the freezer, and make a simple menu. It only needs to be a hot vegetable stew in the winter or a nice salad in the summer. Have something that's Just easy, just natural, simple, plain food, but enough to satisfy you. But also plan for a treat, because this isn't an ascetic day. It's not a miserable day. It's a day of pleasure for God and for us. So put something in a tin, or have something that you're going to open up and keep. And so when the Sabbath dawns, you think, today is the day I'm going to have that treat. And it's a real pleasure for you. So that's something to do, and that might mean that you need to make a shopping list, a Sabbath shopping list. So when you go shopping one day in the week, you can buy all the things that you will need for Sabbath. Maybe you need a packet of custard to pour over something you're making. Buy it and put it in a special place so you know that you've got it ready for your Sabbath. And then I want you to think about more preparation. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of a time we went to Germany. When we went to Germany, it was East Germany, and we stayed with a family who'd not always known the Sabbath, and they were learning the Sabbath, and I learned a lot of things from them. Very early on Friday morning, after they'd had prayers, all the family seemed to know what to do. So what they did was took all the furniture in the long lounge and moved it all to one side of the room. The girls dusted, the boys in the family hoovered all round the skirting boards, all round the edge of the carpet, and then they moved the furniture all back to the other side and did the same on the other side as well. And in the meantime, somebody was also there with a cobweb brush doing all round the top, and then that room was finished. But it wasn't just that when they put the hoover away. It was the fact while they were working, they were singing. And I've never known such a happy family preparing for the Sabbath. When the house was ready, then somebody went out with a broom and swept up all the steps that went up to their front door, swept all those down, made them all look clean, washed down the front door and the paintwork. Somebody else went down in the cellar and brought up a bag of apples, some potatoes, all the things they'd got stored of fresh food in the cellar, and started to prepare it for the Sabbath. So the potatoes were all peeled, the carrots were all prepared and left in water, so there was nothing to do of work on the Sabbath. Everything that could be done was done. Only the salad was finally rinsed again and put on the plates. That was the only part I saw of any food preparation. Even the little desserts were made and put in special little dishes and put in the fridge covered, all ready for Sabbath. And that really taught me a lot of lessons. I used to know a lady as well. She lived in the south of England, and from time to time I had to deliver things to her house. And when I used to call on her, probably about midday on a Friday, when I stood by the door, all I could smell was polish. It was wonderful. And then, as soon as you went into the house, there was the smell of fresh bread, baking. She did a wonderful job of preparing for Sabbath. So these are all the things that build up the patchwork of knowing how to keep the Sabbath, because you've seen how other people do it. But the smell of polish and the smell of fresh bread is something that really impressed me about the idea of keeping Sabbath. In our home, we've kept the Sabbath for several decades now. But when I was small, in our home, each one of us had our jobs. The magazines and newspapers were put away, and they used to put them under the cushions in the old moquette settee and the old moquette covered chairs that we had in the room, in the living room. They were put there. There was nothing left out that could be seen on the Sabbath. Nothing to tempt you to have another go at that crossword clue to see if you could finish it. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so Mum's knitting was put away in a drawer. The beds were changed, so there was fresh linen on the beds, and there was fresh linen all round the house as well. Fresh towels, fresh flannels, fresh tablecloth, fresh tea towels, all put out, ready and clean and fresh for the Sabbath. It was so nice. And Dad would go out and he would clean the car for the Sabbath. And my job was to deal with anywhere where there were shiny taps. So that was the kitchen, that was the bathroom, that was the little downstairs lobby. Wherever there was anything to shine, or anything like zinc or porcelain, that was my job. And shall I tell you why that was? It was because if I was put to clean anywhere else in the house, I would find something to read. And if I was reading, I wasn't doing my Friday jobs, and then it would get near Sabbath and I still hadn't finished them. So I was allocated the rooms to clean where there were no books. So you can imagine I got through it as quickly as I could. But I still think of shiny taps as being part of the Sabbath. And we also swept down the path and the drives outside. So anybody looking at our house on Sabbath, everything was all crisp, all along the edge of the walls, all along the edge of the house. And that was how we kept and prepared for the Sabbath. Let me tell you another story about a very elderly Seventh-day Adventist who must have kept the Sabbath for a long time. He was an old man, and one morning he didn't arrive at church. So as soon as possible, somebody left church and went round to his house to see where he was and see if everything was all right. When they arrived, they found him asleep in bed. The long sleep. He had passed away in the night. But as they looked around his room, they were amazed, because over the chair was his suit, and his suit, the trousers were pressed, the jacket was brushed, his white shirt was hanging on a hanger, and on the side, the dresser by his bed, there was his tie and his socks and his offering and his hymn book and his Bible. Everything was ready just to pick up, to take to the Lord's house for the Sabbath away day. Even though he'd passed away, the last thing he had done was to make everything ready for the Sabbath. There's one secret I want to let you in here. When you're getting ready for the Sabbath, you'll sometimes find that the telephone rings, and there's that job that you meant to have done and you couldn't get round to it. Might be something as simple as cleaning out the fish tank to make it look nice for Sabbath. Leave it. Don't be tempted to do it. It'll still be there 24 hours later when the Sabbath is over. Don't try to finish off any jobs that didn't get done before the sun sets. And that is a big struggle for some people, just to leave things and walk away from it. But it's God that you are meeting on this special day. You see, I want you to think of a beautiful garden. Not long ago, I went to Canada. And when I went to Canada, I visited Vancouver Island. And on Vancouver Island, there are beautiful gardens called the Bouchard Gardens. And they are lovely. Oh, so many pathways, so many places to walk, and so many colours of flowers. So all week, as you're preparing for the Sabbath, it's like peeping through the gates of that wonderful garden, knowing that when the Sabbath comes, you're going to walk through those gates. But for now, you're just preparing to go through those gates. But you've peeped into it. As you've peeped in, you've thought about the things you're going to be wearing when you go through those gates. You've thought about what you're going to be eating when you go through those gates. The music you're going to have when you go through those gates. Can you see what I mean? It's building up into a beautiful picture in your mind. And you're not taking your bank statements when you go through. And you're not taking all the other problems through. You're not taking the message of that last phone call that you didn't want to get. You're leaving it now because it's going to be the Sabbath. When you think about it, there's not much that will hurt for leaving for 24 hours. If it's life and death, that's different. But the general run of life, you can normally wait until the Monday morning when business is open again. Or even earlier on, if you're doing something online, on the internet. So, at the time of the sunset on Friday night, you might be a family that might want to meet together. You might be a couple. You might even be a single person. And that is hard. I know that from members of my own family. But I want you to remember that at the opening of the Sabbath, if you are a lonely person, you're actually joining with a very big family all over the world. There are other families welcoming the Sabbath. There are other single people meeting the Lord for the away day on the same Sabbath. So you're not alone, and that is a good way to think about it. You see, when you're coming up to the beginning of the Sabbath, you need to make sure that everything is put right. If you've had some words of disagreement with somebody, have you put them right? Are they all sorted out? Have you got anything that you promised God that you'd do that you haven't done? Is there somebody that you should have rung to encourage and you didn't get around to it? Do it straight away so you can come to the opening of Sabbath with a heart free, a joyful heart. Because when you go and look through those gates at the opening of Sabbath, those gates at that time will swing open, and then you can walk right through into that beautiful paradise garden with God in your thinking. And that is the wonder of it. And then you can kneel and pray and thank God for that wonderful blessing, for that opportunity when the world's tired and exhausted. You have gone somewhere very special. Tiptoe through those gates. Tiptoe quietly, because you're going into the presence of God. You're going into 24 hours of beauty and joy, and you're joining with heaven during those 24 hours. It might be that you might want to sing a hymn. Even if you're on your own, this is something you can do. If you're a family, you can sing together as a family and pray to God as a family. So Friday evening, how do you spend Friday evening? What do you do if there's several hours of dark time before it's bedtime? Here are some suggestions that you can do. You could sit and share testimonies of what God has done for you. And if you're a person on your own, why not write a letter to somebody and tell them what God has done for you? And then you could make music together. There are many people that have a musical instrument, even a recorder or a mouth organ. Why not try and learn a hymn on your musical instrument so you can actually play it? Some people might have a keyboard, for instance, and it's possible even to have keyboards on your tablet, so you could try picking out the songs, the hymn tunes, and see if you can sing along to that. But all these things give God the glory, because heaven sings. There's a lot of music in heaven. So music and the rejoicing of the heart should be part of our experience as well. It's a time to go through the Sabbath school lesson. You've done it all week, hopefully, and when you've done your 1 or 2 questions each day, now on Friday night, it's time to go right back to the beginning and look at the notes and underline something specially in the notes that you liked, or look at a Bible verse and write it out and learn it, or if you can't learn it, write it on a piece of card and read it until you're really familiar with it. These are some of the things that you can do. And then I suggest that an early night is good, because in the morning you don't want any rushing around. It's supposed to be an away day with God, which is tranquility, and there's very little of that in the world. So get to bed, put the light out, and just relax with God. For these 24 hours, put away all your screens. Don't look at your screens, just put them away. Because the temptation is, and I know this for myself, you look at a screen to send a friend a text, you send a message to somebody, you receive a message, and what do? Your eye catches something else from the news, and then you've spoiled the Sabbath. It's so easy to do. It's better just to put it aside for 24 hours. They didn't have things like that in Garden of Eden, in the Paradise Garden. And so here you are on an away day with God. You don't want to be holding a conversation with God and quietly holding a whispered conversation with somebody else about what's happened with Brexit or whatever's happening on the news. I know by saying that this will date this CD, but you know what I mean, you do understand that. Then, when you wake up in the morning, it might be a wet morning. What matters? You're having a day with God. It begins with that special breakfast. That breakfast that you planned. When I was very young, it wasn't long after the war, and we didn't have much money as a family, so the special treats we had were few and far between. But on Sabbath morning, we always had half a banana each. There wasn't any way in which we could afford a whole banana each, but we had half a banana, and sometimes we had about 2 inches cut off a dried banana, which we shared amongst the family with just little 2-inch pieces, and that was nice. It might be that you wake up to the smell of a really unusual porridge cooked in a slow cooker, maybe with some peaches in it, or some raisins, or some coconut, some vanilla. You can make some very, very nice porridges, and that's lovely for Sabbath morning, particularly on a wet, wintry Sabbath morning. So you could do that. And why not read some verses? Share a promise each that you like around the table, and do that on Sabbath morning. If you're on your own, why not read a promise to yourself before you bow your head to say your grace, and thank the Lord with all your heart for the breakfast he's given you? You've got the whole day ahead. What are you going to do? This is where structure is the key, because if you structure your day, it'll go much more smoothly. You'll have a plan, you'll never be at a loose end, and you'll know what you're going to do, and that will make you much more relaxed, and you'll enjoy the day better and actually gain a bigger blessing from it. So I'm going to talk about those people that are having to keep Sabbath on their own at home. You might have to say to your other half, this is going to be my sacred day today. This is how I would like to keep the Sabbath, and try and explain what you're going to do. But for yourself, set yourself a timetable. Most worship services in Sabbath-keeping churches would start at 10 o'clock. So you need to think about beginning at 10 o'clock. And begin by singing a hymn. Choose a favourite hymn that you like and sing along with it. You can find these on the internet ahead of time. You could even print it down if you wanted, so you have the music if you don't have a hymn book. You could sing along to that. Or if you've got a CD of music, you could sing to that, if you can hear the words properly. Then kneel in prayer. Keep it formal, because you are having Sabbath with the King of the universe. And when we kneel before him, we're giving him homage. Even royal people have to curtsy to the Queen. And so when we go before God, we kneel to God, as long as we're physically able, and God does understand that. As long as we can, let's take that reverent position in prayer. And then choose a scripture reading and read it, a psalm perhaps. Read it out loud. Read it clearly to yourself. But now, this is where I want you to use your imagination. I read of some people once who were in solitary confinement, a number of different people on different occasions. And the way they kept their sanity was by inviting people to come to discussions. And they would invite those people to come in and sit down, and then they would hold a discussion, imagine the reply or the question that would come back, and they would have about an hour of time when they were having this kind of discussion. Now, if you've got your lesson book in front of you, I suggest that you at this point invite the people that you would like to be there, even the cynical people. Invite them to come and sit with you and imagine those faces in front of you, and then begin to teach the lesson to them that you have learned all week. You might feel a bit foolish to start with, but you actually do get used to talking by yourself after a while. And so just start out by asking the first question, and then suggesting that somebody reads the reading. Of course, you would read it yourself. And then you perhaps ask a question. What did you gain from that reading? And you might imagine your friend who's the cynic saying, well, I don't believe that. That's not God speaking. And then you would reply and say, yes, I know it's God speaking, because this is what he says somewhere else, and I trust God. I know he means what he says. Then you could read the note, and then point out something in that note under the question that you had thought about during the week, and you thought, I'd never thought about that before. Because this is what happens in normal Sabbath school classes, and people say, I really appreciated just those few lines, just those few words, because that was a new thought to me. And share it with your imaginary class. You'll be amazed how quickly the time will go while you're doing that, and it won't be at all boring. Just look from one to another, and this is how prisoners in solitary confinement pass a great deal of their time. It actually strengthens the intellectual mind, and it stops you going in on yourself when you're in solitary confinement. So if you're on a solitary away day with God, this is the way you can have a spiritual away day with God and with other people. And actually, you'll get a great deal more confidence from learning to speak out loud like that. So that's how you would spend the first hour. And look at the clock and think 11 o'clock, we actually summarise and we finish everything, and we finish with prayer. And if you have a musical instrument, then why not play a hymn on your recorder? And that would finish that Sabbath school part very, very well. At 11 o'clock, stop. Get up, stretch, walk around your garden, walk around your apartment, your flat, and then get a nice long drink. Look out at any leaves you can see and praise God for them, even if they're dripping in rain, even if they're disappearing in the fog. And if it's a lovely sunny morning, then your heart can truly praise God, whatever the situation. And then at 11:30, it's time for what's called divine service. And at 11:30, begin with a hymn, a prayer, a reading from Scripture, just as you did before. So if you chose an Old Testament Scripture last time, this time you could choose a New Testament Scripture, something from the book of Revelation that you don't know very well perhaps. And then what I suggest you do is perhaps go on YouTube and find a sermon, a message that you would like to hear. And there's one person that I really like for Sabbath mornings, and that's Doug Batchelor. And if you can find anything by Doug Batchelor on amazingfacts.org, then you will find a very good Sabbath message. Or you might be able to get a CD from somewhere with a message, or another DVD that you've put aside, and that will take you very comfortably right until 12:30 when it's time to stop. But always stop with prayer. But now, have you given God an offering? This is the time when what you'd put aside on Friday, like the man that had died, that he put on his bedside table, I suggest you keep a box, and each Sabbath you put away your offering to God. And if you understand it and feel able to, you could put away the tithe, a tenth of what you have to give to God. But that's another situation of the story if you don't understand that. But it is a thought. So now you come to that nice lunch that you've been thinking about. Set the table properly, even if it's just you on your own. Take a few sprigs of leaves, even privet leaves from the hedge, and put in a little jug, and you will have something of God on your table and really enjoy it. If you want to eat outside, set yourself up a little card table or a tiny little eating place and just enjoy the sunshine with your Sabbath meal and your treat that you'd been looking forward to. Now you've got the afternoon ahead of you. So what are you going to do for that afternoon? Here are some suggestions of things you could do. Because it's a day with God, and because it's a day to look at beauty and look at God's creation, I suggest that if you know your flowers, see how many flowers you could collect on a walk. Might even be weeds if you live in a city. Collect them. Weeds are only something that's grown by itself rather than flowers grown in somebody's garden. Collect a little sprig of them and see when you get home whether you can name them all. And if you can't, get yourself from a charity shop a cheap book that identifies British wild flowers and see how many you can actually learn. That's an interesting thing to do. Another week you could do the same with trees. Another week you could do the same with birds. And then you might, if you're choosing to look at birds, you might want to get out from under the cupboard those old pair of binoculars that your uncle left you that you've never really used, and then look around you in the park or in the countryside. If you have a car, you could take yourself out into a country lane and park up in a lay-by and just let the calm of the afternoon and the birds' song around you just drift into your heart and mind. And while you're looking, you might want to look up and look at the clouds. Have you looked at clouds recently? Oh, the number of shapes and colours there are in clouds. In fact, I belong to the Cloud Appreciation Society for that very reason. And so there are now many thousands of members on that, and you can find that on the internet in the week. So that's worth looking at. Try drawing something that you see. Drawing round the shape of a leaf. These things are not for children only. You can be a big adult with a child inside you, because then you will realise that some leaves have got spiky edges, some leaves have got round edges, and you will find so much out about them. Then when you look up in your book, when you go home, you'll think, oh, that was a wych elm. I didn't know they were like that. Oh, and that's an oak. Now I know what that tree is. And then as you drive on Sabbaths to come, in the different seasons, you'll see them change colour. And you'll have a lot of different things to understand. These things take you very pleasantly until it's time to come back home again when it gets a little bit chill. Then have your light supper, something you've looked forward to, a nice bowl of soup and some wholemeal bread and a treat. Don't forget your treats. Then put your feet up and find a nice book to read. A book of a biography of a missionary. A story of how religion began. A story about people who have been very brave for the Lord. All these different things. The story of the Reformation, for instance. There are many different books you can read, but not novels on the Sabbath. Leave storybooks and magazines for another time. The Victorians used to call books like this improving books. You know what I mean. Something that's going to make you think of better things. Something you could talk to God about as you're reading. That's usually the key to whether it's the right sort of book to read or not. Then it's time to say goodbye. Because all the time during that afternoon, it's almost as if The Sabbath is coming to an end, and you are walking softly and gently towards those gates once more. It's so sad when that happens, but when you reach those gates again at 5 to 8, those gates which you closed after you when you went into the God's garden will now open to let you out. Sad, because you have had a lovely day with God. Kneel down. Thank him once again for all that he's done for you, because these are special days, and God has said that he's sanctified the Sabbath, he's set it aside, he's made it a holy day, but he's also blessed the Sabbath, which means that he has put so much goodness into that day that unless you keep it, you'll never know. And so then you come out through the gates close after you, and you are into a new working week. Then you can wash the dishes. Then you can switch the news on. I can tell you it feels quite strange to do that at the end of the Sabbath. And when you wake up on Sunday morning, you'll feel completely re-energized, revitalized again. And the jobs that you maybe did have to leave on Friday will now seem so much smaller. And you'll get them done in a jiffy, all be sorted and ready to go. The Lord gives a miracle of recreation with every Sabbath day. And remember, this is God's day. It's not the Jewish day. We don't have to follow the Jewish pattern. Some people look up on the internet to see how the Jews keep the Sabbath. That is not the way to keep the Sabbath. We don't have to recite Jewish prayers. We don't have to light Jewish candles. We talk to God in our own way, and God will instruct us if we don't know what to do, because he's promised wisdom. But I know from decades of keeping the Sabbath that it is a wonderful, wonderful day, an away day with God. You know how tired you come back from an away day, but how refreshed. That's how you can feel with being with God. Let's just pray about it. Our Father in heaven, I thank thee for this message that's been prepared. Maybe there is someone listening to this that hasn't really thought about how to keep the Sabbath before. Father, I pray that whoever that person is may choose in their hearts to experiment, to put thee to the test, because you've told us to prove me now herewith. This is what the Lord has promised. So many blessings will be overflowing to us if only we will just try what God has asked us to do. So maybe on this coming Saturday, the coming Sabbath, from Friday night sunset to Sabbath sunset, we shall remember that it is a holy time, a holy day, a day and away day to be spent with thee, with thy love, with thy worship. In Jesus' name I ask this. Amen.